Good evening, welcome to Foreigner in the Philippines. So it's a late night meandering, I guess, not dealing with totally specific ideas, but just rambling on a bit, which you kind of do when you get to my age. Well, I was looking at one of the big differences between the West and, well, let's keep it to the Philippines, and that is the attitude towards children. Now, here very much children are regarded as a blessing. They're a blessing, and there's a big reason for this. Filipinos don't like to be alone, right? So their sense of solitude could be regarded as lacking, depending on your viewpoint. But they don't consider a child an intrusion. That's it, and it's a huge difference. They don't want to be alone. Now, if Nana is there in the house on her own, from somewhere a child will appear, children will appear, and she won't be alone. She is grandmother over and over and over, bearing in mind that Beth is one of 10 siblings. And you can imagine how many grandchildren there are. Right here where we are, there's Talaklik, there's Jessica's 3 boys, there's Tata and Maricel's children. That's 3 children. That's Bibi and Ako and Ma. And all of these children are here in our midst. Now, a lot of the time we will have Lorraine and Dat, and they come. There's no question of whether they're welcome or not. It's like it's just a totally foreign idea. Well, are they allowed to be here? Or they're usually always here. Saturday they're usually here, and they come and they're welcome. In all of the children, all children are just generally welcomed, and they are so. In fact, rather than being a burden, which is so often the case in the West, in my experience, they are a resource. They're a resource for the fight against loneliness, for a way of looking at oneself through the eyes of a child, which is a unique thing, and from which we can go back to our own childhood and remember how it was that could be like that. And I remember, for myself, when I came out to America, I went to America, and I took by agreement with my soon-to-be ex, the mother of 3 children, 2 of them mine and 1 by a former relationship, but who was only ever my son, my stepson. I always thought of him that way. I always thought of him as my kid. Well, the way that it worked out, my son Luke came to America with me, and we had always been very close, but we went through some really tough times when I got there, because for one thing, as many single parents will be nodding their head to right now as they watch and listen to this, it was difficult to earn a living, yet have someone to take care of Luke at the times that I needed it, and yet still be able, out of all of that, to still live. And at times it was extremely difficult. I learned a huge amount from looking at life through the eyes of a child, my son Luke. Now, because because we originated from Europe, even though the Brits don't seem to consider themselves part of Europe, they consider themselves British. A friend of mine who was British said she used to have a sign on her refrigerator that said, "It's hard to be humble when you're British." Yeah, okay, so Luc was spelt L-U-C, which is the French way of spelling it. But in England, and I'm rambling a bit, I know, but in England they are still influenced in many, many ways by the French and by the French language. For instance, if I was thinking of going to a college for music, I would call it, let me see, would it be a repertory or a repertoire? No, a conservatoire. It would be a conservatoire, whereas when I went to America, it probably would be conservatory. We were still influenced. When I thought about how many tunes, what kind of program that any band that I was in would play, it would be our repertoire. So we're influenced. So that's why Luc was L-U-C. And I grew to realize very quickly, when it was just him and me, that children are, as the Filipinos see and recognize, they are a resource. They are something that you can draw on. They're a strength that you can draw on, as long as you see them for what they are. I remember wondering where on earth the rent was going to come from once when we were in California, and we were living in a little complex of 64 townhouses, and we were renting one, and the rent was looming up in a week's time, and I didn't have it, and there I am thinking, what the heck are we going to do? And in our little house, the open plan, I was in the kitchen washing dishes, which is always an inspiring time, isn't it? Feeling extremely unmotivated about life. And I remember looking out over the worktop and through the open plan of the window that leads into the family room in an open plan situation, and I couldn't actually see Luc, but I could see that he was in an easy chair, and the easy chair had a little stool that was there included in the chair, and he had his legs up on the stool, and he was sitting back like this, obviously like this, and he had his legs crossed, relaxing and chilling out. And I remember in all of my worries and thinking, what the heck am I going to do? I heard him say, this is the life. And I realized that it really was the life. It wasn't the only lesson. Luc, the meaning of Luc, one of the meanings of the name Luc is bringer of light. And during the time that I had the honor of bringing up a small boy and watching him grow and go out into the world and do well, I remember very early on, before we came to America, and I was bringing him back from school, and we were walking back over a cobblestone bridge in Islington in inner London, and we were very close to home, and we were walking hand in hand together, and he was barely 5 years old. And as I say, I just picked him up from school, and while we were walking along, it was freezing cold, by the way, something I don't miss about England. Just take the flesh off your face sometimes. And And he looked up at me and he said, "Dad, do you know what my name means?" And I had to admit that actually I didn't. I had chosen that name, and I used to tell him many times how, because of the effect that he had on my life, he was the firstborn of that marriage, my marriage where I was going to have a family, my second family. And I used to tell, I believed, and still believe, that you need to tell your children that you love them, and you need to tell them every day. Even kids here that are not my children, I make sure that they know that I love them, and I tell them that. And I would always tell my son how much I loved him. And the change that he had brought into my life was to bring light. He just seemed to emanate light. He brought light into my life, and that's what I would tell him. And on this day, walking back freezing cold, holding each other's freezing cold hands, and he asked me, did I know what the meaning of his name was? And I said, actually I don't. And he said, we learned about this today, the meaning of our names. And he said, my name means bringer of light. And he said, does that mean that I brought the light to you? And I had to say, yes, it does. Now, years later, when we were in, actually, not that much time later, but we were living in California and struggling. Single parent, nothing new, no heroism there. We were struggling. And I remember that he hadn't been doing, talking about being cranky, he hadn't been doing his chores or something, or anyway, I was feeling critical. And I said to him, listen, let's get something straight here. Look what I do for you. I feed you, I clothe you, I give you toys to play with. When you go out to play with the kids outside in the complex, I'm here. And when you get back, I'm still here. I put you to bed at night. I read you stories. I wake you up in the morning and I take you to school, and I make sure that you are safe, and I try my best to make you happy. Now, you haven't been doing your chores, and you should be. Now, this is all that I do for you. Now, you tell me, what do you do for me? And I really, kind of, to my shame, I kind of beat up on him, and I put it all very well. It was a convincing argument. And I asked him, yeah, so, okay, that's everything I do for you. What do you do for me? And he'd been sort of head down while I was in the middle of my trip. And he looked up and he had tears in his eyes. And he said, when I said, so, what do you do for me? And he said, I'm the bringer of light. And in that moment, I realized that he did so much more for me. Almost anybody could do for him what I'd said I did. Anybody could buy him clothes, anybody could, you know. But how many people bring the light into your life? And I was very humbled by that, and I learned a lot about how little I did in the real meaningful, profound way. And it helped me change, and it helped me. This is a 6-year-old boy, 7-year-old boy, and he taught me, the adult, how to be a better person. So in the Philippines, it's true to say that children are a blessing, because they are. But they're only a blessing if you are open to being blessed. And no one can teach you this. No one can make you understand the worth of a child if you are so closed off that you're not listening. You know, we actually live in a world of silence. All of us, we live in a world of silence. Sound only happens here. It happens here. We're not living in this area where all of these sounds are all there and they're all just jumbling about in themselves. No, they're not. There's nothing. It's only in there. The human ear, that miracle of the human ear, transfers the vibrations and makes them into a sound. And along with that, the human mind, part brain, part human mind, part soul, part spirit, however you want to put it, that interprets the sound once it's established in here. It interprets the sound for whatever the real meaning of that sound is. And if someone says, "I love you," how do you interpret that? True or false, or meant, or superficial, or just words? The sound is established here, not outside, here. Only you are hearing that special "I love you" meant for you. No one else, anybody else is hearing the words, hearing the sound because they've got ears, but only you are hearing the meaning and how heartfelt it is. You should remember that. And a lot of the time, children are there to make this sound meaningful. For years and years, I went along with a child saying to her, "I love you," and it took a long time before she actually said, "Me too," because the "I love you" that she was hearing was interpreted in her mind. That's how all of us interpret these sounds that we're hearing, that are only established when they hit the eardrum or the inner ear, everything that's in this miraculous instrument here. So when you actually say, "I love you," I saw on Facebook the other day that a woman needs to be hugged at least once every day. And they need to be told that they're loved. We all need that. We need to be told, but we need it to be demonstrated, and we should really remember that. I remember reading of a poll that was given, and they asked children, what do you understand by the word love? And they asked a load of kids. Always very interesting to hear what kids think about something. But one particular one was a girl of about 8, and she said, "It's important that you tell the people you love that you love them, but you must tell them over and over. You must tell them many times, because they forget," which I thought was a pretty good one. well, that's enough from me. I will tell you another favourite story before I go. There's always one more story, isn't there? And that was of the family that had a young girl of about 3 years old when her brother was born, and he was born with a terminal illness that made it so that time was very limited. And the family had the help of a counsellor from a hospice, which is to help people come to terms with death and death of a loved one in a dignified and respectful way. And it came to the point where the baby was going to die, and the counsellor came and said, have you been working with your daughter to prepare her for this? And the family had. Their mother and father had, and they were a very loving couple, and they'd made sure that she knew that her brother would be going to heaven. And so it came this moment where it was obviously imminent that the little boy was close to the end, and they told the little girl, he's going to go to heaven soon, so you should go in and say goodbye to him. And so she went in to speak to her little brother for the last time, and they listened outside the door, and they heard the little girl go in, and she patted her little brother, and she said, there's no need to worry, because you're going to just go straight to heaven. I mean, that's, you're going to go to heaven, and you'll be taken care of, and there's nothing to be afraid of, and there's nothing to worry about. Oh, and when you've gone, I won't let them flush you down the toilet like they did the goldfish. So we have a lot to learn from children. That's all from me. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.